Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at long COVID, but through a different lens than usual. We're focusing specifically on mental health.
Yeah, a lot of people think of long COVID as a purely physical thing,
Hmm.
but there's more and more research coming out all the time showing just how much it can impact mental health too.
Right, and that's exactly why we wanted to do this deep dive on this new study that came out of Barcelona. It was published in the BJGP Open Medical Journal.
Uh-huh.
The full title is Prevalence and Severity of Anxiety, Stress, and Depression in Long COVID Among Adults in Barcelona. It's kind of a mouthful, but the findings are, well, they're pretty fascinating, especially when it comes to anxiety.
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the things that really jumped out at me too. Over 40% of the long COVID patients in this study had what they classified as extremely severe anxiety.
Wow, 40%. That's a really significant number.
It is. It's way higher than what you'd normally see in the general population.
Yeah, for sure. It really highlights, how much of an impact long COVID can have on people's lives, even beyond those initial physical symptoms we hear so much about.
Exactly. And it's not just anxiety either. This study found high levels of stress and depression across the board, too.
Hmm.
Like it didn't matter what your gender was or your job or how much education you had.
So basically, anyone who's had long COVID could be at risk for these mental health challenges.
That's what the data suggests, yeah.
It really makes you think that mental health support should just be like a standard part of long COVID care,
100%. I
Yeah.
totally agree. So this study looked at 155 long COVID patients in Barcelona,
Okay.
and they had them all fill out this questionnaire called the DAS-21. It's a pretty standard tool they use to measure levels of depression, anxiety, and stress.
So a good way to kind of gauge, what's going on mentally for these patients.
Right.
Were there any other, I don't know, like surprising findings that stood out to you when you were looking through the research?
Yeah, actually, there were a couple of things that I didn't really expect. One was that older people were more likely to experience anxiety and depression after having COVID.
Oh, that's interesting. What do you mean by older, though?
Well, they specifically look at people over 45.
Okay. I would have thought that younger people would be more impacted, mentally. I mean, think about it. They had so much disruption to their, social lives and careers.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm.
But there are some theories about why it might be the opposite. Like maybe older adults are already dealing with some cognitive decline that just happens naturally with age. And so long COVID could be making that worse.
So it's like long COVID is speeding up some of those age-related changes in the brain.
Yeah, something like that.
And that could be leading to more anxiety and depression in that age group.
Right. And another thing that was kind of surprising was that people who worked outside of healthcare were also more likely to have these mental health issues after COVID.
Really? That's so unexpected. You'd think it would be the other way around, right? Like healthcare workers are the ones on the front lines of this whole thing.
You would think so. But one theory is that maybe it has to do with access to information and support.
Yeah.
Healthcare workers are just more immersed in it all.
Mm.
They're more likely to be up on the latest research, and they probably have a better understanding of what long COVID is and what it can do.
That makes sense. It's like they're better prepared to deal with it, both physically and mentally.
Exactly. And if you're not a healthcare worker, you might feel more isolated and uncertain about what's happening, which can definitely feed into anxiety and depression.
Yeah, not knowing where to turn for help or even really understanding what you're going through, that would be really scary.
Absolutely.
It sounds like having that knowledge and support can really make a difference. But for people who are struggling, what can they do about it? Like, what are the treatment options for the anxiety and depression that comes with long COVID?
Yeah. Well, that's a really important question. And the thing is, there's no magic bullet. Treatment really needs to be personalized for each individual based on their specific needs and situation.
So it's not as simple as just like prescribing an antidepressant.
Right. It's more complicated than that. While medication can be helpful for some people, it's often just one part of a larger treatment plan.
Okay, so what else is there? What other options are out there?
Well, therapy can be incredibly effective for managing anxiety and depression,
Uh-huh.
specifically cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT.
I've heard of CBT. What exactly is that? How does it work?
So CBT focuses on identifying and changing negative thought patterns and behaviors,
Yeah.
the kinds of things that contribute to anxiety and depression.
Okay.
And it teaches you practical skills and ways to cope with your symptoms and improve your overall well-being.
So it's more about giving you the tools to reframe your thinking and develop healthier habits.
Yeah, exactly. Instead of just masking the symptoms with medication.
I see.
And then on top of therapy, lifestyle changes can also make a big difference.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Things like exercising regularly, getting enough sleep, eating a healthy diet, And mindfulness practices like meditation can be really helpful too.
It's amazing how connected our physical and mental health are. Taking care of your body can really support your mental well-being.
Totally. And speaking of connections, researchers are also exploring the potential biological reasons why long COVID might lead to mood disorders.
Oh, that's interesting. Let's
Yeah.
talk about that. What's going on in the body that could be contributing to these mental health challenges?
Well, one of the leading theories has to do with inflammation.
Okay.
So when you get sick with something like COVID, your body triggers this inflammatory response to fight off the infection.
Right.
But sometimes that inflammation sticks around even after you're not sick anymore.
So even though you've recovered from COVID, your body is still kind of on high alert.
Exactly. And that chronic inflammation can have effects all over your body, including your brain.
I see.
And researchers think that this brain inflammation might be messing with the balance of chemicals that regulate mood.
Ah, so that's why people might start experiencing anxiety and depression.
Right. It's like this domino effect. Long COVID triggers inflammation, which impacts the brain, which then affects your mood.
Yeah, makes sense.
And there's a lot of evidence to support this theory. Studies have shown that people with long COVID often have higher levels of inflammatory markers in their blood. And those same markers are linked to a greater risk of depression and anxiety.
Wow. So addressing that inflammation could be really key for managing the mental health effects of long COVID.
Definitely. And beyond inflammation, there are other potential biological mechanisms at play too.
Like what?
Well, for instance, some researchers believe that long COVID could be disrupting the gut microbiome.
The gut microbiome. Wait, isn't that just the bacteria that live in our digestive system?
It is, but it's a lot more than that. The gut microbiome plays a huge role in our overall health, including our mental health.
I've heard about the gut-brain connection, but I don't really understand how it works.
It's pretty complex, but basically the bacteria in our gut can actually communicate with our brain. Yep, through all kinds of pathways, like the nervous system, the immune system, and the endocrine system.
So our gut is actually sending signals to our brain that can affect our mood.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the research suggests that long COVID could be throwing off the balance of bacteria in the gut, leading to what they call dysbiosis.
Dysbiosis, what's that?
Basically, it means there's an imbalance in the gut bacteria.
Yeah.
And that imbalance can then send signals to the brain that contribute to anxiety, depression, and other mood issues.
It's wild to think that something happening in our gut could have such a big impact on our mental health.
I know. It's fascinating. It
Wait.
really highlights how interconnected everything is in our bodies.
It does. So if long COVID is causing these gut problems, are there ways to fix that?
That's what researchers are looking into. There's a lot of excitement about the potential for therapies that target the gut microbiome, like using probiotics or fecal microbiota transplants to restore the balance of bacteria.
That sounds pretty intense.
Yes, some of it is,
Yeah.
but it could be a game changer for treating the mental health consequences of long COVID.
So instead of just focusing on the brain, we might be able to treat these mood disorders by addressing the gut.
Exactly. It's about taking a more holistic approach, looking at all the different factors that could be contributing to these mental health challenges.
And then coming up with a treatment plan that addresses both the physical and mental aspects of long COVID.
Right. It's all connected.
Earlier we were talking about how the study found that older adults and people working outside of healthcare were more likely to experience anxiety and depression after COVID. I wonder, do you think those groups might also be more susceptible to these gut microbiome issues?
That's a good question. And to be honest, we need more research to know for sure,
Mm.
but it's definitely possible. Like, we know that the gut microbiome changes with age. Older adults tend to have less diverse gut bacteria, which could make them more vulnerable to disruption.
So it could be kind of a double whammy for older folks. Age-related changes in the brain plus these potential gut issues, both contributing to the mental health impacts of long COVID.
Yeah, that's a possibility. And when it comes to people outside of healthcare, it could be that things like stress diet and access to healthcare play a role in their gut health too.
It really makes you think about all the different factors that contribute to our overall well-being, both physically and mentally. It's not just one thing. It's this whole complex interplay.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from this study. We need to start thinking about long COVID management in a more holistic way. It can't just be about treating the physical symptoms. We have to address the mental health side of things too.
I think that's a really important message for anyone out there who's dealing with long COVID. You're not alone, and there is help available.
Exactly. If you're struggling with anxiety, depression, or stress, please don't hesitate to reach out for support.
Talk to your doctor. Find a therapist. Look for resources in your community. There are people who want to help you through this.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the key takeaway here is that long COVID is a complex condition with the potential for long-term impacts. And those impacts include mental health.
Right.
But with awareness support and more research, we can definitely get a better handle on these challenges and how to manage them.
This has been such an insightful conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us and helping us all understand the mental health aspects of long COVID a little better.
My pleasure. And for everyone listening, remember, knowledge is power. The more you know about long COVID and what it can do, the better you can advocate for your own health and well-being.
So true. So keep learning, keep asking questions, and most importantly, keep taking care of yourselves. Until next time, happy diving.